Hi everyone, Father Lamb here, and it's Wednesday, January 10th. And we're in ordinary time now. This last Monday was the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. That ended the Christmas season, and so now we're just a couple days into what we call ordinary time. Just touched by something in the scriptures today for the Mass reading, and it was from the book of Samuel. And in this book you have Eli, who's really the high priest, kind of the judge of the Israelite people, the high priest. And Samuel's a young man. He's just starting his relationship in the Lord, so to speak. And there's this beautiful passage you may be familiar with where Eli goes to sleep and then Samuel goes to sleep. And all of a sudden when Samuel's there sleeping, he hears the Lord calls to him and he says, here I am. But he thinks it's Eli calling him. So Samuel gets up and goes over to Eli and says, you called me. And Eli says, no, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. So he goes back to sleep. And again, the Lord calls him. And Samuel thinks it's Eli again. He gets up and goes over to Eli. You called me. He says, no, I didn't call you. This happens 3 times. And finally, the 3rd time, Eli catches on and he says, go to sleep now, because he suspects it's the Lord calling him. And if you're called again, reply, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel goes back to bed. He gets called by the Lord again, and he wakes up and he says, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. And that really begins our spiritual lives. And how often in our own lives with God, we don't say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. We say, listen, Lord, your servant is speaking. And there is a time for us to speak, but our relationship with God begins with God. He's the one that starts the relationship. He's the one that initiates the relationship. So we really need to then have some time in our lives where we listen to God. And then I think the problem comes up is, how do we hear God? Where do you experience God's presence? Well, since we're in ordinary time, I'd just like to suggest that you and I look for God's speaking to us in ordinary things, just ordinary everyday things. How does God speak to you? God speaks to us in like the laughter of a little child, the face of a little baby. He speaks to us through, let's say, an older couple who's been married for years and years and years, and just the love that they have for each other. God speaks to us through a friend when they affirm us or love us and help us in some way. And God does this in ordinary ways every day, and so often you and I miss it. And tied in with this today too is the Psalm, which is Psalm 40, and it's, here am I, Lord, I come to do your will. Kind of the takeoff of Samuel. And Isaiah says that too, here I am, Lord, send me, And I remember that from Ordination Day, that beautiful song, here I am, Lord, don't worry, I'm not going to sing it for you now, but here I am, Lord, And I remember on Ordination Day going, yeah, here I am, Lord, send me, and then 5, 10, 15 years later, here I am, Lord, where are you? Then we enter into a deeper relation with Christ, a deeper relation with God. Sometimes we wonder where God is. And we have to go back to the ordinary, everyday things that God does in our lives and that we can then experience and see his presence in ordinary ways. So if you and I are faithful to the little, everyday, ordinary things, God's extraordinary grace will come through to us. And I think of the students one of the students got to spend the weekend with the great guru, the spiritual master. And after the weekend was over, the student went back to his buddies, his peers, his other students, and they were anxious to hear how the weekend went. And they asked him, what was the most important thing to the master? And the student said, whatever he was doing at the time. Totally present to whatever is in front of us. That's really how we live the spiritual life. If you're making a pot of tea, be present to making that pot of tea. But so often in our spiritual lives, we're running to the next thing. We got the cell phones out and all of that. And it just really adds to the chaos in our world. Be present to one thing at a time. Even this multitasking thing, I don't really think in the long run we get anything more done. If we would just finish one thing at a time, be present to it, then we can move to the next thing. So I challenge you this week, I challenge myself, now that we're in ordinary time, look for the presence of God in ordinariness, in the everyday things that has so much grace there, that the Lord is always trying to speak to us in different ways, And to really get to that, we have to find time for silence. silence. Matthew Kelly would say the classroom of silence. He would say that you can learn more in the 5 minutes in the classroom of silence than you can in a year of reading books. And that's quite a statement from someone who's an author. Give yourself some silence every day, just quiet. And you might be uncomfortable with it at first. That's normal because we're so used to being scattered and running here and there. Be present to that silence. Invite God into it. And then finally, when we get to that deeper silence, then we can say from our heart and mean it, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." God bless you.